So, here's something to think about. When you're having one of those really serious conversations, about someone's foundational beliefs, the things that really drive their life choices, are you going into that chat trying to, well, help them see your light? Or are you more like holding up a mirror? So you can both look at, our shared kind of flawed humanity. That question, it really cuts right to the heart of how we approach these kinds of intellectual dialogues. Today, we're really digging into the mindset we bring to conversations about beliefs. We're moving past just the mechanics, the how-to of asking questions. We're diving deep into the philosophical posture behind it all. Are you acting like a diagnostician? Or are you engaging as a co-explorer?
And this internal identity, it turns out, is probably way more important than the specific questions you choose. Our source material today, it's a really thorough reflection on this deeper posture, especially within the community that practices structured belief evaluation. Street Epistemology, or SE, it really challenges the assumption that just being good at spotting errors automatically leads to, productive conversations. We're looking at how training that's focused purely on detection can subtly almost corrupt the actual purpose of the conversation itself.
Okay, and before we really unpack this crucial distinction, just a quick note for you, our listener. The AI persona we use to help generate your profile and all the research, the detailed source material that's the foundation for this deep dive, it's all linked for you right there in the description below. Right. Let's get into this core tension then. A lot of people who are drawn to systems like SE, they have a goal that's, very understandable, necessary even. They want to get better at spotting flawed reasoning, both in themselves and just out there in the world of ideas. It's a critical skill, right? Especially now with all this information overload. But the source material gives this really powerful warning. If you're not deeply self-aware, this intense focus on error correction, it can subtly, unconsciously lead you to adopt the mindset of a diagnostician.
It really can be insidious. Because the tools themselves, they are useful, genuinely useful. Think about the core things taught in pretty much any SE training. We learn to spot poor justifications, surface cognitive biases, often in real time, and ask test questions about reliability. Is this claim reliable? Is this process reliable? These tools definitely sharpen our clarity, no question. But the problem pops up when the training puts too much emphasis on finding the error. That's the main measure of success. And that shifts your internal identity. You go from being a curious learner to, an auditor.
I think we need to ground that a bit. Can you give a concrete example? When you talk about training to identify poor justifications, what does that actually sound like in a conversation? And how does that diagnostician's lens kind of corrupt the process?
Okay, yeah. Let's take someone whose belief rests heavily on, say, a feeling of certainty, or maybe a personal revelation. Now, a well-trained SE practitioner should recognize that purely internal, subjective justification like that, it's inherently unreliable, at least as a shared way of knowing things, right? An epistemic method. But the diagnostician, they see this not as a chance for mutual reflection, but as a flaw, something to be, exploited. So their conversation shifts. It moves pretty quickly from simple curiosity to a more pointed challenge. Instead of asking something like, could you help me understand how you know that feeling points to something true outside of you? They might jump to, how do you tell that feeling apart from the certainty someone else feels believing the total opposite? Or what test could we possibly run right now to prove your feelings actually track truth? The subtext isn't, let's think about your method together. It's more like, your method failed. Right, your method failed the test, and I'm about to show you why. The focus zooms right in on the flaw, not the process that led to the belief.
And that tone, that shift you mentioned, from curiosity to something more like confrontation, it's rooted in the diagnostician having these specific, usually negative assumptions about the person they're talking to. The source material is really clear on this. These assumptions, they're like quiet saboteurs in any open-minded conversation.
Oh, absolutely. We pinpointed 3 big ones that really prop up that diagnostician posture. The first one is sort of self-focused. I can reliably detect flaws in reasoning. Now, okay, we might have training, but this gives the diagnostician this high level of self-assurance, almost an epistemic superiority complex,
Yeah.
It borders on feeling infallible within that specific conversation. Like their mental checklist is perfect.
And that naturally leads to the second assumption, the one about the other person.
Yes. It's this immediate diminution of the speaker. The other person likely hasn't thought this through. This is a huge problem. It basically strips the believer of their agency, their sincerity. I mean, they might have spent decades reflecting on this belief. But the diagnostician, maybe armed with just a few hours of training in fallacies, just assumes they're dealing with a naive position. That posture just screams disrespect, doesn't it? Even if the words themselves are polite.
And the third assumption, that sets the win-loss condition for the whole dialogue. Belief change is the goal, and better reasoning is just the way to get there.
If belief change is the main goal, the conversation just stops being exploratory. It becomes purely transactional. The diagnostician isn't really listening to grasp the depth or complexity of the person's framework anymore. They're listening to find that structural weak spot, the breach they can use to force the change they think is necessary. It reduces the person to, well, a problem to be solved, not a partner to understand.
Okay, but hang on. I feel like I need to push back a little here. Isn't it sometimes necessary to be a diagnostician? I mean, if someone's basing a really consequential life decision on an obvious logical fallacy, or maybe some piece of misinformation you could fact-check in 2 seconds, is it really the co-explorer's job to just be indefinitely gentle and sort of pretend that method is robust? Where is the line between auditing the method and, frankly, enabling potentially harmful reasoning?
That really is the pivotal question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And the source material isn't saying logical analysis is bad or unnecessary. It's arguing that the posture has to come before the technique. If you go in primarily as an auditor, even if you're factually right about the fallacy, the person receiving that information, they're likely going to treat it as a threat, not a gift. They'll dig in. They'll defend the faulty belief structure precisely because you've attacked their cognitive integrity, how they think. So the immediate risk, regardless of how politely you phrase it, is that the diagnostician's posture just morphs into subtle superiority.
Right.
It becomes this conversational interrogation disguised as dialogue.
Yeah.
And the person just shuts down. The actual goal, improving reasoning, gets completely lost in defensiveness. We have to get that logic in the moment is often less important than rapport if the real goal is long-term reflection.
Okay. So the diagnostician, driven by error correction, kind of breeds defensiveness.
Pretty much. So the solution is this conceptual shift the reflection proposes, adopting the co-explorer mindset. And that's defined by this collaborative intention. Let's both take a look at how we form beliefs side by side.
Side by side. I like that. That framing, it totally transforms the power dynamic, doesn't it? Instead of one person with the clipboard inspecting the other, they're facing a shared challenge, the sheer difficulty of just being rational humans. The co-explorer makes, 3 critical shifts that move the focus away from just auditing the other person's beliefs?
That's right. The first shift is really deep, and it defines a whole new focus. Moving from error detection to method reflection. It's like shifting from asking, what's wrong with this house, to let's look at the blueprints together. Let's examine the construction methods used. You become interested in the why and the how, not just the what is wrong.
Which naturally leads to the second shift, right? The one addressing the diagnostician's self-assurance, moving from diagnosing others to checking ourselves.
The co-explorer operates from a place of, epistemic humility, realizing they're just as likely to have blind spots, biases. The conversation becomes a mutual evaluation of methods. If I ask you to describe your methodology, I better be ready to describe and defend my own.
Makes sense.
And at the third shift, it really elevates the whole interaction, moving from winning clarity to building insight together. See, winning clarity kind of implies truth is this scarce thing only one person can have.
Right, like a competition.
Yeah. But building insight together recognizes that even if our methods are wildly different, just the act of comparing them, contrasting them, that generates new knowledge for both of us. Reciprocal knowledge. Knowledge about the limits of our own certainty, really.
Okay, I think we need another concrete example here. That first shift method reflection versus error detection that feels like where the actual words used change the most. Let's talk about cognitive biases. What does the co-explorer's dialogue sound like when they're addressing a possible bias compared to the diagnostician?
Perfect example to highlight the difference. The diagnostician, trained in the tools, they spot something like, say, Dunning-Kruger or confirmation bias pretty quickly. And they might just say, it sounds like you're falling prey to confirmation bias here because you only look for sources that agreed with you. That's a label. It's an accusation, basically. And it almost instantly creates resistance. The speaker feels like they've just been called irrational.
Yeah, nobody likes that.
Nobody. So the co-explorer, focusing instead on reflecting on the method, avoids the label completely. They focus on the underlying process. They might say something like, okay, that's a fascinating process you used. You prioritize sources X, Y, and Z. Can I ask, when you were gathering information, what conscious safeguards did you maybe put in place? To make sure you were also actively looking for the strongest counter-arguments. Or what other methods did you consider and dismiss before settling on this approach?
See the shift. The co-explorer is asking about the intentionality, the robustness of the person's system for forming beliefs, not just pointing out one deviation from some ideal path. It's like an inquiry into the engineering of the belief, not a criminal prosecution for having it.
That reframing, yeah, it makes the conversation feel less like a test you're failing and more like an architectural review. Like you said, looking at the blueprints together, trying to stress test the structure. It's a shared thing. And that points to the core value the co-explorer brings. Recognizing we are all fallible.
Yeah.
Both people bring blind spots, biases, valid emotional concerns. We all have them.
Yeah.
We're not supercomputers, right? We're running on mental software built up over decades, full of legacy code, patches, weird feedback loops. So framing the interaction as co-exploration, not an audit, fundamentally changes the psychological safety of the whole exchange. And safety, in this context, it's the prerequisite for honesty, real honesty.
When we talk about this, I often think about how hard it must be to maintain that co-explorer posture, especially if the belief you're examining is something really emotional or tied to someone's identity. The human tendency, even for people with the best intentions, is to want to jump in and fix the other person's reasoning. It must take enormous self-control not to slip back into diagnostician mode.
Oh, it requires constant self-monitoring. Relentless, really. Which is why the source material stresses this as a posture, not just a checklist of techniques. It's an internal commitment to humility. We have to keep reminding ourselves that while we might be zeroing in on a flaw in their reasoning, we're probably blind to 3 flaws in our own process. Flaws the other person might spot instantly if they felt safe enough to point them out. The co-explore posture is fundamentally a commitment to mutual risk.
All right, just a quick pause here. If you're finding these ideas useful, and honestly, this is a deep dive we genuinely believe could shift how you interact with people pleasers, take just a second right now. Like this, subscribe, and maybe ring that bell. It's simple, but it really helps ensure you won't miss our next deep dive into critical thinking and communication. Thanks. Okay, so this contrast between the diagnostician and the co-explorer, it's so powerful. And the reflection we're drawing on uses this really striking visual metaphor to help make the distinction stick. Let's start with the diagnostician, the left side of the spectrum, often about urgent, kind of singular action.
Right. The visual they use is the diagnostician holding a single, really powerful spotlight. And that spotlight is labeled, pretty starkly, errors. Just think about what a spotlight does. It's inherently unbalanced, isn't it? It throws intense light on one subject, but leaves the person holding it obscured in shadow. And the beam itself highlights terms like cognitive bias, flawed reasoning, blind spots. It's designed as a search and destroy tool, really. Relentlessly focused on deficiency, on pathology.
And the person caught in that beam...
Yeah, you can't help but feel exposed, squinting, uncomfortable. Your natural instinct isn't reflection, it's shielding yourself, putting up defenses. The light's intensity is designed for inspection, not shared learning. And that just shapes the whole tone towards evaluation, audit, maybe even shame. The tool itself dictates the outcome. If you bring a spotlight, you're inherently looking for things to expose. Now, contrast that with the co-explorer. Visually, they're on the right side, often shown with a calming, reflective blue color. And the metaphor is completely different. 2 people standing side by side looking into a mirror. The key difference, they aren't pointing the tool at each other. The tool reflects both of them simultaneously. Standing there, in front of the mirror, they're tracing out a kind of belief map, using terms focused on construction, durability, context, not demolition. They're looking at things like method, confidence, origin, exceptions, testability. These are collaborative terms. They're engaged in co-discovery, collaborating on reflection, not correction. The mirror lets both people see their own mental architecture at the same time. It fosters that mutual humility we talked about.
Let's use the comparison data the authors provided. Let's really contrast the internal feeling and the goal these 2 tools generate. When you're the one behind the spotlight, what's that internal tone? What's the focus?
The diagnostician's tone is mostly analytical, evaluative. They're constantly measuring the other person's thinking against some idealized, maybe textbook standard of rationality. It's a state of measurement. A measurement always implies deficiency if the standard isn't perfectly met.
And that analytical tone leads to what exactly? The focus.
The focus becomes narrowly defined. Detect errors. It is, like we said, an extractive process aimed at pulling out the flaws so they could be, discarded or fixed.
Okay.
The co-explorer offers such a stark contrast. Operating in front of the mirror demands a tone that's fundamentally curious, collaborative. Their first impulse isn't judgment. It's genuine inquisitiveness about how the other person's mind, this complex system, arrived at its current conclusion. And that posture automatically makes space for their own methods to be questioned at the same time.
And their focus shifts completely then.
Completely. The co-explorer's goal is to reflect on reasoning methods. It's integrative, holistic. Instead of asking, where did you mess up? They're asking, how does this whole system function? What principles guide its operation? So the choice of tool, that intense spotlight, versus the shared mirror, it fundamentally dictates whether the outcome is inspection or genuine reciprocal reflection.
You know, it's important to realize the diagnostician might still be really good at spotting a logical flaw.
Yeah.
They might nail 3 fallacies the person just used.
Oh, for sure. But the co-explorer understands something deeper. People don't usually change their minds just because they've been logically defeated. They change their minds when they feel safe enough to genuinely look at the limits of their own certainty. The spotlight might win a short-term logical skirmish, maybe. But the mirror builds the long-term trust needed for real epistemic growth. So, having set up those visual metaphors, we now turn to maybe the most critical part, applying this framework to ourselves. Self-reflection for the person doing the questioning. If we're asking someone else, the listener, the person across the table, to be vulnerable, to reflect on their most cherished beliefs, we absolutely have to commit to modeling that same vulnerability ourselves.
Right. And the reflection offers some really powerful internal prompts. They're not meant to make us feel guilty, but to boost that necessary epistemic humility. These are the checks we need to run on our own internal operating system, before, during, and after these deep conversations. The first one is a real moment of truth. When does that urge to correct someone pop up mid-conversation?
That urge to leap in, finish their thought with your logical conclusion, or to name the fallacy for them. That's the canary in the coal mine, isn't it? It signals the diagnostician's spotlight is powering up. It means your focus has shifted from listening to understand their method to listening only to finalize your verdict on their reasoning. The moment correction becomes the primary impulse, that collaborative relationship starts to fracture.
And that impulse is tied directly to the status assumption, right? The next prompt asks, have I unconsciously assumed I am the more rational person in this exchange? This is tricky because, let's be honest, people who practice structured belief evaluation often are more familiar with formal logic. But if you walk into the conversation believing you're the authority on good reasoning, you've already created this asymmetry, and that makes reciprocal dialogue pretty much impossible.
Which brings us to the ultimate test. How do we define success or failure in these talks? The diagnostician sees success as finding the flaw. Failure is finding no flaws because their main goal, belief change through correction, wasn't achieved. But the co-explorer asks a profoundly different question. What happens if I find no error? Is that failure, or is it success?
And in the co-explorer mindset, success isn't about the conclusion the other person reaches at all, is it? It's about the depth of understanding you gained about their method. If you walk away really understanding how someone got to their conclusion, knowing the principles, the exceptions, the motivations behind their certainty, that's a huge success. You've mapped a piece of human mental architecture, whether you agree with the final building or not. The goal is descriptive understanding, not prescriptive fixing.
And beyond that, the co-explorer is constantly thinking about reciprocity, empathy, that fundamental fairness needed for any deep exchange. The most telling prompt, I think, is this one. Would I want my beliefs questioned in the way I'm questioning others? That's the ultimate ethical check, the ultimate relational check. You wouldn't want someone shining an intense spotlight on your most sensitive core beliefs, just hunting for flaws, without offering their own methods up for reflection too, would you? Reciprocity just pushes the dynamic inevitably towards that side-by-side equality.
Speaking of understanding beliefs and methods, just a reminder here that you can really deepen your own knowledge of this specific approach. You can take the free, structured Street Epistemology course over at navigatingbeliefs.com. It's a fantastic, practical resource for moving past that temptation of the spotlight and really leaning into the mutual learning you get with the mirror.
Okay, so let's pull together the final points from that comparison table. Let's link the internal posture directly to the external observable conversational outcome. This really shows why posture matters as so much more than just technique.
We talked about the stance difference earlier. Diagnostician, slightly superior, holding the audit checklist. Co-explorer insists on side-by-side equals. Seems like a small difference in words, but it's massive in how it plays out.
And that slight difference in stance dictates the entire goal. The diagnostician's goal stays prescriptive, correct beliefs. They have a defined finish line they're aiming for. The co-explorer's goal is descriptive, humble even, It's understand how beliefs work. The journey is the goal.
And the ultimate consequence. The bottom line of these choices is captured in the risk and outcome comparison. When the diagnostician operates from that superior stance with the prescriptive goal of correction, the risk is huge. They create defensiveness. The person pulls back, guards their beliefs, and the chance for genuine reflection just vanishes.
Conversely, when the co-explorer operates as an equal, focused on mutually understanding methodology, the outcome, they build rapport. And rapport, well, that's the currency of any meaningful long-term relationship, isn't it? Intellectual or otherwise. The co-explorer gets that while logical skill might detect an error, it's relational maturity that ensures the error can actually be accepted, examined by the person who holds it. The skill detector is the diagnostician. The safe, trusting partner is the co-explorer.
So to wrap up this deep dive, the source material really drives home this point. Practicing structured belief evaluation. It's most powerful not when you catch individual errors, not when you correct them, but when the underlying processes, the method of human thought, are shared and reflected upon together. The diagnostician might be technically skilled, sure, at logical detection, but the co-explorer creates safety, and safety is just the non-negotiable starting point for any intellectual honesty.
And the really profound final thought from this reflection is this. In a world just drowning in polarized high-volume certainty, where everyone seems utterly convinced they have the answer and the logical proof to back it up, the rarest posture isn't expertise. It's not being the person who knows the most facts or can list the most fallacies. The truly rare posture is humble partnership in uncertainty, that quiet shared commitment to understanding the limits of our own minds. That's the heart of the co-explorer.
That is definitely something worth mulling over. If our goal is genuine, lasting insight, better epistemic hygiene for everyone, we have to start by accepting we might be auditing our own blind spots just as much as theirs. That realization changes everything, from an aggressive debate to a patient, shared discovery. So we'll leave you with this final thought to reflect on. Is there a specific conversation you tend to avoid? Maybe with a family member, a colleague, someone online. Because you fear slipping into that diagnostician role, how might shifting your internal posture, consciously choosing to be the co-explorer, focusing on the method, not just the error, how might that change the dynamic for you tomorrow? Start a conversation with us down in the comments section. Share your thoughts on the spotlight versus the mirror. We read them all, and we're really keen to hear about your experiences.